excited because, I mean, DAOs are so important, right? We've been learning a lot during like the last years, but I think this year in particular taught us a lot about how important it is to think on new evolution in DAOs, the new frontiers. So this is basically what this panel is about. Before we start, I encourage you, the audience, to get alert because we are going to ask you so many questions. So I'm just gonna say that. And yeah, I'm so excited about this lineup of panelists. So I'm gonna start introducing Eugene from Scroll. Eugene is working on governance at Scroll Foundation, and it's a research director at Metagov. At Scroll, Eugene is focused on the newly launched DAO, and at Metagov, he leads the grant's innovation lab and support DAO stars. So I would love you to explain more about the Scroll's launch, right? The governance infrastructure, but also why DAOs are important for you, like now in 2024.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with the latter. Hi, everyone. So in terms of why I think DAOs are important, or maybe to rephrase that as why I choose to work in DAOs, is I'm unaware of another place that's experimenting this much with governance approaches. Because at the end of the day, at least for me, what DAOs are all about is streamlining how we can coordinate as a collective on a shared goal. And things like co-ops have existed for millennia, so this is not a new challenge. But the essence of what we're doing here, at least from my perspective, is trying to streamline cooperative ownership and management. And so as part of that, kind of what we're starting with at Scroll DAO, because we just launched, so we're not, we don't have proposals up, or we're not at that stage of things, but we are doing this co-creation cycle, which is effectively an attempt at taking an approach rooted in participatory democracy and co-creating the initial focus. Because I think a lot of DAOs, you have labs, you have foundation, you have a DAO, and all three of these have different kind of tensions and incentives and just different people working in them. So how do you actually maximize alignment enough so that all three of these can benefit from each other, but that they're not literally, different versions of the same thing? So yeah, this kind of alignment is really important.
Thank you so much. So now I'm going to talk about Gene. Gene is part of the Lido DAO infrastructure team and focus on informal design, governance participation, and delegates program. Gene, thank you so much for being here. And also, do you have a mic? Yeah, I have. Yeah, we can share, but they're gonna help us as well. Tell us more about the Lido's governance framework, and as well, why DAOs are important for you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen, and yes, I'm a contributor in Lido DAO. Firstly, want to actually to agree that DAO are important because it's probably the only one innovation in organizational design in this century. And the only way to understand how it works and to make it works actually is contributing to the DAO. And regarding the Lido DAO, it's quite mature. I wanted to say that it's open for everyone who are ready to go deep enough in the structure, in the proposal, in the all constraints that you faced when you're trying to understand something really transparent but mature.
Nice. Thank you so much. Now let's talk about Merlin. Merlin is a co-founder of Morpho Labs. He started by leading the on-chain team and now is leading the integration team to support the whole Morpho ecosystem. Morpho is still in developing, right? So what would you say about this journey that you're like going through it to build this new DAO? And also, why are you so excited about DAOs?
Right. So, yeah, I'm super excited because I think it's been like 3 years since like 2 years since the token has been deployed and it's not transferable yet. So I think it's like one of the only protocol that is like this old with no liquid token yet. And I deeply think that it can like change like the incentives of like the different stakeholders that are either using the protocol or building on top of it. So we are really excited about like the idea of like what will happen through this long journey. Like will it like be maybe a playbook for other protocols, like to wait a little bit more, like to create more relationship with their users before like launching like the token or having it like liquid like day one? So yeah, super excited about that, and we'll see. Right now, the forum is like talking about the token launch and many other like how to structure the governance. But I guess we'll talk about this a bit later on.
Great. So let me introduce myself. My name is Angela. I am core contributor at Web3 Citizen and also a small contributor in the Arbitrum DAO. And recently, we've been learning about DAO trends in the 2024. We can briefly say that some of the most important things happened this year were about resource reduction, which is basically people is thinking about new committees, but also some of them are saying, let's start from scratch. And at the same time, participation, lack of participation, or how can we ensure that more participants are actively contributing, and also token utility. I don't know if you heard about, but some DAOs are starting thinking about how can we do these tokens more valuable. Thinking on that, we just launched like some topics as a group, and then I'm gonna introduce you guys to help us understand what's your opinion around it. So let's start talking about DAO operations and also security around it. Jen, you are part of the infra team in the Lido DAO, and you mentioned that if you want to be part of it, it's open, but you need to go in deep, right? And this one. So what do you see as the most significant operational challenge when scaling governance in the DAO, and Lido in particular?
Yeah, to be honest, I think that the biggest challenge when the DAO scaling is to build processes, which is actually, we are kind of incredible in Lido DAO as a contributors. I think so, really. Like, we have strong process how to make governance safe, how to hold all those governance flow safety, how to check that everything proposed on chain is safe, is like not malicious. But same time, it's really challenging to make it open, to make it understandable for everyone, and to make it easy to go deep and just not just checking bytes because you know that this need to be equal to this, but understanding what's happening. And this is probably future challenge. But first step, always building the processes, which is also tough and take a lot of resources.
And talking about these processes that are important, Eugene, what do you think are most of the things out there that you would say it's effective talking about functional governance?
Yeah, I mean, I have to 100% agree with what Jen just said and kind of focusing on that operational perspective. And I mean, you know, Scroll DAO, we're kind of very open about the fact that we're taking a progressive decentralization approach. You know, we're not necessarily opening up everything day one, and more than happy to have a theoretical or philosophical discussion on decentralization later. But I think in reality, like, why this approach is needed is because you need someone to really focus on operations, or put a different way, you need someone to do the dirty work and the boring work and the thing that no one really wants to do unless it's their job to do that, and they might get fired if they don't, right? And like, I'm not doing these things because of the fear of getting fired. I'm doing it because I love it and it's really exciting. But nonetheless, right, it's my full-time job to work on making sure that the DAO is as functional as can be in the approach that we're taking, right? Like DAOs in decentralized community, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. There isn't the right way to DAO. There isn't the right way to decentralize. There isn't the right way to build a community. There's a lot of wrong things you can do, but there isn't a singular approach that you could take, and it's guaranteed that everything will work well, right? People are messy, life is messy, etc. So when you take this kind of operational perspective as your primary focus day one, or as one of the primary focuses, I think it makes it a lot easier to empower people to be able to contribute, right? If I tell you, hey, go do stuff, your first question is probably going to be, what stuff, right? What do you actually want me to do? And I feel like the danger of starting in overly decentralized environments is effectively you tell potentially millions of people in the world, I mean, it would be great if that many people actually care about governance, you're probably telling a few hundred or a few thousand people in the world, like, go do stuff and like make sure it works, right? And that's just not fair to people, right? Like if day one you show up as an intern in their company, at any company, and they're like, go be the CEO, you're probably not going to be ready for that. But you need, like, there's a reason, like, we learn skill acquisition, talent acquisition, process creation. So yeah, long-winded way of saying, I really think that operational excellence is kind of the main role of foundations. And if you are okay with this progressive decentralization approach, that's kind of the primary outcome you want.
And when we think about decentralization and foundations' role, another topic that is interesting is security, right? So, for example, Merlin, you guys are building like the Morpho DAO now.
Yep.
And we're talking about this, operational struggle, right? That foundation in the first place is running out. What do you think about security? And what is like the first approach that you think about that?
Right. So I'd say that the approach that we have on the DAO is like quite similar to the approach that we have at the protocol level, which is about like, in fact, the best process are the one that you don't need to implement, in the sense like if you have like something that is very simple, very scoped, or where you try to limit as much as possible what the governance needs to do to make it work, then it's like the best approach. We think like the least that the DAO needs to do to make to grow the Morpho ecosystem, the better. And so if you take the Morpho protocol, like it's fully immutable, you can't upgrade it. The DAO can just whitelist new interest rate model, switch the fee, but that's it. And the DAO cannot like do new stuff, new maybe risky things, like if you upgrade something, maybe you can break some integrations, maybe you can introduce like a critical vulnerability. And we think that we should take the same minimalistic mindset also to the DAO, not only to at the protocol level. And this will reduce like a lot, like the attack surface. If there's a governance attack, like it can't affect the protocol. You reduce the likelihood of being hacked.
So this is the perspective of our panelists, but we love to listen. What is your like feedback here? We talked about operational, right, as an important part of the DAOs, and also about security and how can you limit this in a way that delegates don't have to think about all of the details. So please, raise your hand if you think the security approach is something where you would agree. Great. It's democracy. We are here to choose, right? Great. Raise your hand if you think foundations should play this operational role in the first place. Good. We're good. Great. Let's continue. It's democracy. Great. So let's talk about delegates' role now. And I would love to ask, Jean, should we have delegates in the future?
Who are we here? Like DAOs? It depends. Actually, I really agree with Anthony. He told that each DAO needs to have its own approach, and that's like true for delegates also. Some DAO will have delegates, some DAO will have token holders involved, some DAO will have something else which is not invented yet, probably. But yeah, I think that if we look, I don't know, 3 years perspective for Lido, this is the way to operate. Lido DAO will have delegate.
Great, thank you so much. And Eugene, who should be responsible for selecting delegates? As, for example, Scroll was like trying to invite new folks in the ecosystem, and how do you envision that part of the?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. In general, you obviously want to keep the process open. Anyone who is willing to be active in the community, you want to give them that opportunity. At the same time, a lot of really smart people who want to be part of it are just busy and might not realize your documents or deadlines or on top of every little detail because they might be looking at 20 other DAOs or something. So I think it needs to be both kind of inbound and outbound, right? Folks who come to the DAO, everyone is welcome. But, you know, I think a lot of DAOs have versions of like verified or highlighted or whatever name to like, here's a smaller subset of delegates that we strongly encourage you to delegate to. You know, if someone's coming in that's like totally full on and has no reputation or anything, or you go on their Twitter and it's just airdrop farming, you know, like, do you want to promote them being the top delegate? That might be a little scary. But at the same time, I think you need to be intentional, right? Like, do you just want a bunch of, you know, white Americans or Europeans coming in and that's like the extent of your global community? That's also probably bad. So you might need to do some intentional outreach to make sure that you have global representation that's actually closer to being reflective of the global population if you're doing like these core protocols that are meant to be open and accessible to everyone, right? If you're doing like a super niche DeFi protocol where at most 1,000 people in the world care that you exist, then yeah, you could have a different mindset, but especially if you're building like L1, L2s, like something that's meant to be flavors of a world computer upon which anyone can build, I think you want to be intentional in that outreach too.
And if we think about outreach of the delegates, let's talk about the roles. Merlin, what do you think about the roles a delegate should be? Like just focusing on voting or focusing on a particular role? What's your approach around that?
Right. That's a good question. I guess like if you want to follow, so it depends on DAOs. Some DAOs are like there's like an activity that forces you to be basically full time on the job, like to be sure that you have the whole context on like on all every decision that are made. We think that again, like if you take a minimalistic approach, like we'll try to have the least number of like proposal as much as possible. So we should have like delegates that have like time to do something else, hopefully. But we deeply think that delegates should be at least stakeholders and that are impacted by the protocol and like not just like random person that are just like, oh, I like governance, so I will spend like my time here. For the first batch of delegates, for instance, like we've called delegates among like every stakeholders, which are like power users. We have like builders, so people just like, okay, random people that have built like some cool stuff on top of Morpho, like a front end, something to leverage, or like true product on top of Morpho. So they are directly affected by the Morpho growth and its network, and also like risk creators that are directly like participating in the growth of the network, and those like and investors as well. So we have like those 4 key type of stakeholders that will be part of the first batch of delegates, and we think that this is a good approach, like to reach out, because they already have the context on what's happening at the protocol level, on what's happening in the forum, because they are directly affected by it.
Great. So it's now turn of the delegates or the audience, right? What do you think about this approach of reach out this first batch of delegates? Raise your hand if you agree with it. Nice. And I have another one, and it's basically, do you agree that one delegate can be part of 7 different DAOs? Raise your hand if you agree with it. Interesting. And should be delegates just focusing on votings or also being part of different groups such as councils or so on? Raise your hand if you agree with delegates just focusing on voting.
I'm completely disagree. What even that means, focusing on voting, delegates need to be involved in the building, and sorry, I'm just...
We just had this conversation actually in Edge City last week, which is, yeah, I need to continue with the topic, but it was basically, there's a lot of some organizations that have delegates involved in different areas, right? So what does it mean? Is that okay? As you guys mentioned, there's not just one answer. A lot of things wrong, but we don't have like a just clear way to tackle. My last topic for today, proposed by you guys, it's about incentive. And I want to have an open question here. What do you have, or what do you think about incentive related to delegates? Should delegates be compensated, or how is your approach around that, Jen?
Yes, I do think that delegates need to be compensated. said, right now we're testing the first iteration of the Lido DAO delegate framework, and we started with the proposal to make the delegation open in the one hand, and the have delegates incentivization program, because I believe if you're able to engage a lot of token holders into governance via your work, you need to be compensated, because as I said, the Lido DAO is mature, the processes are simple, but the context are huge, and you need to understand a lot, you need to analyze a lot, and so I do not believe, I think the worst which may happen with the DAO governance is the delegates who are just voting because they need to vote, just especially if we're talking about the silent agreement. And if we want to have delegates who are involved, who are arguing with contributors, with proposers, we need to pay them for that work, I do believe.
Great. What about you, Eugene?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I also think there's, right, just in terms of like concepts around what we're thinking, right, like shifting from one token, one vote to delegation, and just like a democratic perspective is shifting from one person, one vote on every issue to representative democracy, right? You elect your representatives and you want them to go represent you somewhere. What's interesting is like, right, take that concept. I live in Washington, D.C. in the States, right? We have a mayor. I vote there locally. But what if that mayor was also the mayor of Arlington and Bethesda and like a bunch of other places, right? Or maybe even New York and LA and places that are just like very different, even if in the same country. So I don't have a theory I'm pushing, but I just think it's an interesting tension point, right? I think the current reality of delegates, I fully understand why delegates are incentivized to be in multiple places, especially given that almost everyone that has a version of incentivization is experimenting. So it's not a tested and tried structure that is working well per se. I think the oldest experiments are 9, 12 months old, or maybe Uniswap's first program was a little longer. I'm forgetting the exact timing. Oh no, Maker also had one. Yeah, so there are some maybe a year or two old. But nonetheless, right, there could be the version of like maybe my full-time job is being a Lido delegate or a Scroll delegate or a Morpho delegate, right? That can actually be a future career path. And it's unclear to me if that's a good or a bad thing yet. I'm just very interested in seeing like when will be the first versions of that. And I think there's also an interesting risk with doing these programs of incentivization. You know, we are thinking about it for the future. I think it might be healthy to start off without it and then like quickly try to layer it in or experiment with it. Again, when are those timelines? These are open questions. But nonetheless, like what happens if you come out the gate during a bull market and you're like, oh, to be competitive, we're paying like the top delegates 10, 15, 20K USD a month. And then you're like, oh, we can't afford that. Please do it for 5. You know, like that's not going to be good for your delegate structure, right? So you also have to be cautious with like easing into it, because if you overcompensate and come down, that is just going to be brutal for your culture. So like, right, if you've ever worked at a job and then you got cut in half on your salary, you probably weren't thrilled. So yeah, you just have to be really intentional with these experiments.
Great. And what about you, Merlin?
Yeah, I think I'm sharing your thoughts on that, about like, we may need to incentivize them at some point. This is a topic that we are currently discussing, and like there's no clear answer. I deeply think, like coming back to what I was saying before, is like if they already have like some incentives to vote in the first place, because if they vote and like the decision is good, then it's in their interests. The Morpho ecosystem will grow, the Morpho network as well, and because they are users, integrators, or part of like how the protocol is working, then they have an incentive to already participate, because this will directly benefit them. And I think like trying to align people from like at the root is like starting from that is better than trying like to compensate with incentive, because maybe even incentive won't be enough, or you will incentive like people that are just there to grab the money and like and maybe take like be a delegate at Morpho but spend their time at Lido instead, or the opposite, because like Lido is paying more, or I don't know. It's like so yeah, I think like coming back to the root is like crucial here.
Can I just quickly plug one thing? Also, through my Metagov and DAOstar hat, we are starting a kind of open research group for folks who are keen to explore delegate incentivization and just what does that look like, right? Because we just had a couple of fun points, but there still is a lack of clarity of like, well, what are we compensating for? Is it high voting percentage? Is it quality of contribution? What does that mean? How do you structure that? How do you weight different aspects of contribution? So I think there's a lot of open questions. I know that we're talking to a few folks who are working on like LLMs trained on governance forums to identify unique contribution, counterpoints, right? Like there's a lot of fun exploration space here. So yeah, if anyone here is keen on being part of some of these research efforts, please come find me and I'll loop you into some of that.
So let's start with the questions, and then if anyone has any opinions around it, it's open to it. So raise your hand if you agree that delegates should be compensated. Yeah, it's obvious. Raise your hand.
Farmers.
If you think delegates should be compensated in the first place.
As in like day one when the DAO
Exactly.
launches.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, great. So now let's continue with trends or frontiers in the DAOs. In this case, in particular, focusing on these current DAOs that we've been like talking about. Jen, what do you think is something unique in your DAO, and Lido in particular, and it's going to change the way that we see DAOs in the future?
No pressure.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. All right. Like when I'm thinking about future, thinking for Lido DAO, I'm thinking about the dual governance because it's kind of biggest governance project that we are building right now. And actually, like the research started 2 or 3 years ago. Like 3 years ago. Thank you, Kate. The team helping me. And I think this is the main future thing that we have in Lido, and also I personally think this is the proactive thing. Dual governance is the mechanics which empower stakeholders, actually users of the protocol, to participate in governance. They will have the possibility to vetting the LDO holders, which is governance token decisions. And I think this is really proactive move. And it's really great timing to have it live right now, because if the DAOs will evolve as the companies evolves, I do not believe in 10 years it would be even possible to build and have the DAO approval for things like that, which is highly empowering users. I think this is kind of main trend for us.
Eugene, you're in the Scroll DAO. It's been working in these co-creation sessions, right? What is something that you're excited for the Scroll DAOs in the future, and something that you would say this is going to be new frontiers for the whole ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, just starting with what's going on or what I'm excited for, everything. We just launched like 2 weeks ago, so we are just getting things started. So when people ask me how it's going, my honest answer is, I don't know, like talk to me in a couple months. So, I mean, right, this co-creation cycle is this 7-week co-design period where we've kind of laid out what we see as some initial priorities pertaining to growth, community, and governance, research and development, and working with those who are interested in partaking to co-design the first proposals there, right? And it's also trying to say, because we've already had folks come from, professional delegate X and be like, this is the kind of, grant program or VC strategy or whatever, and, everyone has their own incentives. So one of the goals of this co-design is for me to be able to say, hey, you 7 are all pitching something along the same lines. How about instead of us voting on all 7 of your proposals, we just co-design one together? And we try to figure out what is the kind of the minimum viable idea that is present in all of these that the community is converging on as the foundational aspects, and do it, right? From the perspective of, say, like taking a VC example, just because a few people have pitched me that, and again, pitched as in like just throwing out the idea. It's not like backdoor voting or whatever. And my response is always just like, why do we need a VC day one, right? There are literal professional VCs. Maybe a good first step is map everyone who's investing in the Scroll ecosystem. Maybe one of them wants to co-develop a fund with us. That makes a lot more sense than having a bunch of people who've never been in a VC start a VC. So I think that there's this right? There's this still like jack of all trades mentality about delegates that doesn't fully make sense to me, where it's like, hey, I have experience over there and I'm going to pitch you something over there. And it's just like, on the one hand, it's great that everyone can have a voice in everything. It just feels like an unsustainable system though, right? So you have to balance this aspect of how do you empower people to be able to have a meaningful voice and contribution to an idea, and at the same time let experts focus on the things that they know and be accountable to a wider group. Right, I think the Eigenlayer Foundation, the Eigen Foundation governance structure that they're pushing is very interesting, because like TLDR version, they're trying to experiment with what it means to step away from relying on voting all the time. Right, how do we move to things like preference signaling? And I think that's a really interesting question. Right, this is not a unique question of Web3 governance. It's been asked in a lot of other domains, and it's just hard. So I don't think anyone's going to do it right off the bat. But it's just this question of, right, like, I'm from the US, so we just had a wonderfully peaceful and chill presidential election. And if we actually had to vote on like every policy and every little thing that the president and the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial, right, that would just be voter fatigue on everyone. And so, but the current structure is too much. Like, you effectively have like limited annual or 4-year cycles to vote for certain politicians. And so like, where's the middle ground, right? There is things like ranked choice voting. There's all these different kind of structures. But I'm just very interested in playing around with like preference signaling, and that is a specific domain where we want to work with people building those experiments to be able to understand how can you kind of lay out what you want to see. And if things match that, then your vote is kind of automatically counted, and you will be notified of like, hey, this is how your position is going to be here. You now have a chance to veto, right? With all the information presented to you, possibly in the future with LLM interfaces that you could quickly ask it questions that are grounded in the information available, right? Just how do you make it easier for people? There's too much information, right? Like, I would love to be involved in Lido DAO and OP and Arbitrum and all these DAOs. It feels like a full-time job, each one. And I just like, I want to also see my wife and dogs and have a family and do all these other things. And right, so I think like the sense making, I call it like fracturing governance surfaces. If you have like everyone vote on everything, I call that like a global governance surface. Those are highly unsustainable. So how do you create the right fractures? And like, as Merlin was saying, right, it sounds like y'all are designing it in a way that is intentionally constrained so you could have optimal focus on certain decisions. Right? And there could be a discussion to broaden that scope eventually, but it's really good at making sure that whoever wants to vote cares about those topics. Right? And even for us, as we're getting started, someone might care about growth strategies, someone might care about community, somebody might care about governance. We don't necessarily need everyone to care about everything. I would love you to be if you have the time and energy, but that seems like an unfair expectation from me to anyone who wants to be involved. So it's just like this never-ending song and dance of like understanding who you're working with from a community, who has the energy to give you time and attention, and then what are the right surfaces for them to shine.
Nice. And what about Morpho? What is like your approach or something unique as dual governance or preference signaling for the Morpho ecosystem or DAO in particular?
Right. So we have like an off-chain governance right now. We are preparing for the token launch in the next
Alpha.
So, so there's like a lot on the plate. So, like as you said, like I can't really talk about like what we're going to do. I think like the first step is like, and the unique thing that we have at Morpho is, as I said, like I think this is one of the few protocol which has been like having this token that has not been transferable, and like I'm pretty sure it will have like some weird or unexpected behavior on like how token holders will vote, or one example is like you have always farmers like forming your protocol when you like give incentives to bootstrap at the very beginning of the launch of your protocol. And those farmers, like, because the token was not transferable, they could not dump the token and go into another protocol. So either they just not deposited the money, or they became like power users, and they are providing feedback on the interface, providing feedback on like the product, etc., which is super interesting because like it created a relationship with like users that are at the beginning like mercenaries. So I think this will have like like maybe a good impact. We'll see. Talk to me in a few months. But I think this is something that is super interesting, and we'll like work on like pushing as much as possible users to delegate to existing like the first delegating batch. And as I say, like our approach is like really taking the time, having a minimalistic approach, like we did for the protocol. And I feel that like one mistake of like governance is like trying to do too fast, trying to copy what others are doing because it seems cool, or it seems like, oh, this is like the thing to do, and launching, and it does not work because like it's not solving any problem, or it's just like not what is expected. And yeah, so I think like taking the time and like having this smooth and gradual decentralization path, and like really questioning like everything that, oh, you should do this, you should do that, questioning everything, every step. And like if you don't understand like what is like we have a value at Morpho which is like justifying everything, so every decision. And I think this is really important because like if you justify like every step, every decision that you make, then that means like you have like strong arguments. And if it's backed by strong arguments, like that means like at least you understand like the mistake that you did, because you can get back and say, okay, that's but if you just like make the decision like that, you can't understand like what you're doing wrong. And I think this is one mistake that we will try to avoid.
Interesting. So we've been going through like different topics such as operations or such as delegate roles, what they should do or not. Potential frontiers that we're gonna see in like near future, or even things that we are currently working on, right? Such as the dual governance thing that Lido has been working last 3 years. Yeah. Great. But now we've mentioned all of these, I would love you to ask the last question, which is basically, now, no focus on Lido or Scroll or Morpho, but the whole DAO landscape. What do you think are going to be some trends next year, in 2025? And then I would love you to encourage and raise your hand and say, hey, I would love to mention this also, such as liquid democracy, futurarchy, or whatever. So, Jen, what would you say is something that you are going to see or you would love to see next year around DAOs?
Actually, I agree with Eugene. Like the participation issue isn't resolved yet, and we will just see the different approach to resolve participation issue. Would it be like some optimistic governance? Actually, in Lido, we have the set of things that might to be decided the way you explain, or it would be token utility researches and some like, results of those researches. But in general, I think that before moving forward, DAOs need to resolve the situation with participation, voting fatigue, who will make those decisions, and how to keep those decisions decentralized yet.
Yeah, I think, I guess one thing that I'm very hopeful for in the next year or so is actually doing new things. And by that, I mean, it feels like a lot of DAOs to date is recreating thousands of years of democratic innovation in a short time span, but arguably not that many things have been done that aren't tried somewhere already. And usually have like failed miserably dozens or thousands of times, and yet we're still doing it and expecting it to work for some reason. So yeah, I'm just excited. It feels like we're getting to this inflection point where like, yes, we recognize one token, one vote doesn't work. Yes, we recognize that no matter how hard we try and whatever incentive programs that we do, we're still highly constrained on like percentage of actual participation and like all these other things that are just like fundamental democratic or decentralized community problems. So I'm hopeful that we're going to start actually innovating with really new examples that have been wanted to be tested in these other domains, but there just wasn't the tech for it. And there is this really exciting convergence of the tech, the right people to build the new things, and an appetite for trying these new things that seems like 2025 through 2030. My kind of major hope for DAOs is we start doing things that other communities are going to look at and be like, even if they, we can, especially if we can diverge the attention of, or the association of like DAOs equal crypto equals FTX, let's not touch this, right? Like a lot of people who are not crypto people still have this very intense visceral reaction. But if people just start looking at DAOs and it's like, ooh, that's where community is being innovated. Like that's where there is the frontier of how communities self-organize and actually accomplish goals together. If we don't hit that mark by 2030, I don't understand what we're doing here, right? So like, what am I focused on and trying to work towards? And I hope each and every person here, and like we're keeping each other accountable and pushing each other on, is if we are not getting to that kind of point, let's just go do other things and stop wasting each other's time, to put bluntly, right? Like, let's practice these things and like take audacious risks. And I'm not saying like, oh, you have a new experiment, go put a $10 billion trade. No, like don't rush, create containers, run small experiments, then keep scaling them. But just there's nowhere else where this kind of democratic innovation is happening at this kind of scale. And I mean, again, I'm coming from America. It's just a highly polarized, uncomfortable time, no matter what your views are. I would love to see things emerge from DAOs that get adopted in digital communities, that get adopted in certain municipalities, and they're like we're a stone's throw away from it, right? Like, why aren't there participatory budgeting experiments in DAOs? They happen in small governments and they go really, really well. Yet we're not doing them yet, right? So we still need to finish capturing, like, I think Vaughn and the Butter team was talking about like futarchy earlier, right? Like there are these disciplines that have had decades or if not more of research in them, and we are not trying them. So we need to accelerate our speed of trying everything that is known so we could really push the frontier of what is not yet known and what will hopefully innovate our ability to do more together.
Right, tough questions after those two answers. Yeah, you talk about the tech. I think this is a good point in the sense like, okay, let's try stuff, but the problem is like doing tech, and it's coming back to, I think it was the first question, like on the operational side and the security side. And when you are dealing with governance, usually you are dealing with like several hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. So you can't mess up with the setup. Maybe at the beginning, but not much after. And the problem is like some experiments like requires like on-chains like a mechanism that are like not fully tested or not project ready, and and you don't know also as well like what you really need, but like having something that is audited like costs a lot. It might cost like 100 of K, and it takes like maybe 2-3 months or something like that, which is like slowing down a lot. Like I think the experiment that can be done by the different DAOs. So I think if we can like streamline everything, like all the operational costs, all the auditing costs, all like the development cost, but this is super hard. Like everyone is like working on like improving that. But if you speed up that part, that means like your iterating cycle is like getting faster and faster and faster, and thus like you can like do many more experiments and see like the one that are working and the one that are not working. Which is kind of some sort of like a natural selection of like what's working and what's not, and then like project like can pick like the good ones and try themselves and see if it fits their own community or and DAO. Yeah, just that.
I really respect the fact that rather than mention, yeah, this is going to happen, we look back and it was like, let's stop experimenting as much as possible, but rather go back and see what was wrong or didn't work, and let's try to fix it to continue. So we have 2 minutes, and I would love to encourage any of you guys that might have any opinion around this conversation, and what do you think about the future of DAOs or the next trends or frontiers, at least for the next year or the next 5 years. Someone here that would love to take the mic?
Any brave souls?
Hello.
Hello.
Hey. Yeah, I would like to know your thoughts on treasure sustainability and also next frontier for DAOs, like new experiments and treasure sustainability. How to manage both?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. I mean, I think that's also just like an open area. I think there's, right, when it's sustainability, there's also just the question of like, is the goal of any given DAO, like Scroll DAO, Lido DAO, Morpho DAO, like is our goal to be open in perpetuity? Or do we have like, right, especially for foundations and DAOs, like I think we also will start seeing realistic timelines and whatnot. But it seems like there's a maturation of players who are focused on like DAO treasury management and getting more into that world. And I know from like the grant perspective, there's a lot of conversation on just like grants aren't enough. So like what is the actual investment landscape? And so if we start doing more convertible notes or VC style, then you can get money back in. I have mixed opinions on that. But nonetheless, I don't know, but I figured I'd just jump in first. I don't know, what do y'all think?
Thank you for saving us. But I think it depends, like what is like treasury sustainability? Do we want it like wasn't behave as all other crypto behave and be volatile? It's impossible. What is like how to govern the treasury depends on the DAO vision on how to actually govern everything. For example, if we look at Lido, we are trying to, we have kind of a few focuses, one of each security, the other is like long-term vision that governance need to be like pacified and like there would be no governance in the future. Regarding the treasury, I believe that it really depends on the vision. For Lido, for example, we don't want to make it touchable for humans and keep it in the contract. This is the most important part for governance and treasury management.
Right. I think Morpho will be like mostly focused on on the treasury management because, as I said, like at the protocol level, you can't really do much things. Like instead, like you can do the switch on the fee, which is quite important and like a huge decision to make. But it will like first be on the treasury management, and our approach again will be like very minimalistic and like trying to experiment things, but with like a minimal budget. So right now I think there's like a proposal to do grants, but it will be only with like 100K Morpho, which is like very small compared to like what we have seen. Like I think it was like Arbitrum that like sent like a huge amount of like a fund to like a gaming fund or something like that, and like right now it's not responding anymore or something like that, which is a bit like you have like a principal agent problem here. And I think like if you want to avoid it or like big mistake is like trying like small stuff, small steps and see if it works. And so that like if the 100K or maybe more in the future it does not work, then like forget about that and let's try something else instead of like trying to pour like dozens of millions on like something that won't work because it's not like what works with that particular DAO.
And also just one last quick thought is like the amount of money you need to spend when you're building an ecosystem in a new product is very different than when you're sustaining and just trying to not have it break. And so like years 1 through 5 versus 5 through 10 versus 10 through 20 is just going to look different. And, you know, like I know there's already DAO M&A coming up as a topic. So like we might just follow corporate world in that sense. So who knows? But I think if like as you find your product market fit in staying in that, your size should decrease. But we have no clue what is that sustainable number right now.
Great. So we went through past possible issues, present conversations, and also possible future frontiers. Thank you so much for each of you that participated in the panel, and thank you so much each of the panelists that helped us through the debate.
Thank you.
And thank you for moderating.
Let's go. Thank you so much, guys.